Hi BookTube and welcome to a new video. This is a tag video. This is the 10 on a theme tag which I first saw on Brian at Bookish's channel, and he said on that it was originated by Mel over at Mel's Booklands Adventures, and they both chose the same theme, which is 10 books on the theme of revenge. But anyone who fancies doing this, any theme at all that links 10 books of your choice. So I've gone for the theme of cities, where being an urban person, I like books that are set in cities. I don't like books that are set in the rural countryside, which rules out a lot of the Victorian canon for me. So when I say cities, I'm talking about books that for me had the city up front and central within its narrative, almost in some cases as a character in itself. But just it's about the centrality of the city. That's what I was interested in. So the first city is London, obviously my city, and there are loads of books about that. But I actually think this is one of the best about contemporary London. This is Plume by Wiles, which came out last year. It is not a perfect novel because the central character is an alcoholic, and I don't really like reading about alcoholics and addicts. I've grown a bit tired of that. But despite that, this book is superb about the changing face of London, its sort of corporatisation, the privatisation of space, as corporates buy up space that used to have public access. It's about consumerism replacing the sort of genuine, sort of feel of a community, and it just becomes a sort of bland, corporate, Mao-like existence with even the entertainment that's provided. And it's also about sort of geolocation, about how you can sort of see what people are up to, and sort of changes in status and everything through people's phones as they report themselves minute by minute, day by day. So this is a really good book on London. I ought to say that I've reviewed most of these books in my time on BookTube, and I will post links in the show notes to the original reviews. I'm not going to talk at length about any of them. This is The History of History, a novel of Berlin, and has the advantage of, has the accolade of being the first ever video I recorded for BookTube was a review of this book. And I think that video lasts about 4 or 5 minutes, and I rather developed my style for talking at greater length since. But anyway, so this character in this book is wandering through Berlin and the ghosts of Berlin from the Second World War. And she talks about two mothers. One is a Jewish mother who tried to shield her children as long as she could during, obviously, the roundup of Jews and being sent to labour camps and then to the death camps. And the other is Magda Goebbels, who was in Hitler's bunker with the Russians just outside, and she and her husband gave all their children cyanide because they didn't want to be captured by the Russians, because they imagined terrible, or basically what the Nazis did to everybody else in Europe, they imagined being heaped upon them by the Red Army. And it's basically a book about the ghosts of these two women in Berlin, and the sort of the vanished architecture and the architecture that still persists from that time. It's a very interesting book. 3. Paris, Vernon, Subotex by Virginie Despentes. This is only volume 1. I think there's 2 or 3 volumes in all. I must admit I haven't branched out into them for the reasons I'll go into. So, anyone who doesn't live in Paris has this view of Paris as this sort of great romantic city, artistic city. It's a city for tourists as we perceive it. But obviously the Parisians live there. To them it's may well be those things, but it's actually a living, breathing city. And the thing about Paris is it has very little subculture. Certainly in the mainstream white citizens, there's no subculture in Paris. What there is provided by its recent immigrants. And what I mean by that is if you go on the metro and there's a busker, they're not playing guitar along to Pink Floyd on their tape recorder, they're playing a cello. There is no pop culture. The cultural icons in France used to be their philosophers and their authors. There was no level below that. But this book, which is set in the 1980s, begins to set that record straight. This is a France very much, or a Paris I should say, very much influenced by American and British popular culture, where punk and new wave have been sort of inherited. I mean, France has always inherited American teen culture, and Jerry Lee Lewis is a huge figure there. Still, as is Woody Allen. That as I say, there's no indigenous pop culture in France. It's all inherited. So this is about a bunch of 80s punks and new wave artists who've all obviously grown up a bit and tried to carve careers based on their sort of music origins. Some are journalists, some did become musicians, but they're all pretty much screwed up, heroin addicts, bad marriages, bad relationships, all that sort of thing. And Vernon Subotex himself is made homeless, and he spends his time either couch surfing with all these people, or even he does spend time on the streets as well. And it's through that you get a view of Paris now and the Paris as it wanted to be in the 80s. That is the best aspect of this book. The problem is that all the characters are so unlikable that I had no desire to read volumes 2 and 3 about these people. New York, well, obviously one could choose a whole myriad of books about New York. Alphabet City is one of my favourites. Last Exit to Brooklyn, although that's less about the geography and more about the people. This is by Jonathan Lethem. This is called Chronic City, and is the New York stoner novel. But the interesting thing about it, and I don't know if you can see it, this is a tiger, which I won't go into the reasons why it's the motif of the novel, but its teeth, its fangs, are New York skyscrapers. And there are many, many sort of cultural themes going on here. For instance, there's an ongoing real-life soap drama of a woman who's in a space station, but it's trapped behind a Chinese space minefield, so everyone is following her fate on TV because she's an actress primarily. There's this tiger figure seems to be sort of attacking New York, sort of boring up through the sidewalk and pulling buildings down as it does so. But it's very much, as I say, it is a stoner novel, and I've grown very bored of stoner novels, but this is one of the few that I could reread. It is superb. Okay, the next city is Tokyo, and this is Tokyo in a certain time and a certain place. This is David Peace, the first two in his Tokyo trilogy. We have Tokyo Year Zero, David Peace, set in 1945. And Occupied City, David Peace, I think also 45 or maybe 46. And I'm glad to say, because this is a superb trilogy, finally, after several years, we're going to get the third in his trilogy, who is published this year, this summer. This is about two women who are murdered, and the forces that are on the hunt of the killer in a very, very difficult time in 1945 Japan, because it's, there are still suspicions about those who have stayed loyal to the emperor and are not prepared to accept the peace. And it's really taut and tight writing. And this is based on a true story about a deliberate poisoning outbreak in Tokyo, which was never solved who was responsible for it. And this is done in a Rashomon style, that is, with sort of, everybody involved has a different perspective. And again, superb writing. So these are two of the three Tokyo trilogy, and I'm looking forward. I'm assuming the third one's also set in Tokyo rather than just Japan. And I can't wait for it. I mean, I've had to wait a long time. This one was published in, so 2009. So we've waited 10, 11 years for the follow-up. Next city, Belfast. Milkman by Anna Burns, and the previous novel called No Bones, not No Burns. Everyone knows about Milkman, or should do by now, and it's true because the character is mainly walking around the city streets. You get a fantastic sense of the geography, and then the overlay of no-go areas, the code of what you can wear, what you can say, etc., etc. Even what your name is can portray which community you're from. So, I think this was my book of the year, or number 2 of the year when it came out. it's certainly a fantastic book. But this is worth a read. This is very interesting because a lot of the themes that come to full development in here are in here. And in a way, this is more brutal than that. There's a couple of scenes in here, again, involving because Belfast was a geographically divided community, a bit like The City in the City by China Miéville, only this is for real. You get a real sense of the city. There's one chapter on about how this Protestant paramilitary group called the Shankill Butchers, who really were the ugliest, thuggiest brutalisers. I mean, they lived up to their name. Would go and snatch Catholics, completely innocent Catholics, off the street and butcher them. And there's a chapter based on that, where the geography of where the border is and where cars go and which cars are suspicious and which are, it's just chilling, absolutely chilling. And there's another chapter where the streets have been blocked off because a bomb has gone off. And these two characters find themselves in a pub. They went to school together, haven't seen each other for years. One seems to be very well off. The other has got 6 sort of screeching kids in the pub with her. But she gradually plies the other one with drink and gets her drunk because she's married to a member of the security forces. And again, very, very chilling. All by the happenstance of the roads being blocked off and then sort of coinciding in space in this pub. This is, there's a few things wrong with this, but mainly when it's bits that set outside of Belfast. All the stuff in Belfast is absolutely on point in this. I've rather lost number, so we've got London, Berlin 2, Paris 3, New York 4, Tokyo 5, Belfast 6. Okay, so this is Bogota in Colombia 7. The Shape of the Ruins by Juan Gabriel Vasquez, which I read I think last year when it was shortlisted for the International Book Prize. And it's not a great book, but it's very informative on the history of Colombia through a couple of sort of ongoing conspiracy theories, the equivalent of the Kennedy assassinations, but in sort of Colombian terms. But because it's trying to unravel conspiracies, and there's lots of witness testimony of court records produced and stuff. There's a lot of forensic detail on the street layout in Bogota, and as was pertained to these plots. So you do get a really good idea of Bogota. To be honest, because it's court testimony and you're reading something that's already been written in theory, it has no life to it. But the interesting bits are not about Bogota, ultimately. It's about Colombia's history of being washed in blood ever since it came into being, into independence from Spain. And that I did find interesting. And we are on to, is it 8? Yeah, book 8, The Cellist of Sarajevo by Stephen Galloway. This is a fantastic book set in the middle of the civil war in Yugoslavia, which obviously Sarajevo, of all cities in former Yugoslavia, is probably the most ravaged. And in sort of memoriam of 22 people who were sort of blown up in a marketplace bomb during the conflict, a cellist would come out and play the same piece of music every day for 22 days to mark the lives of the deceased, but also to show that art and beauty and grace could not be quenched by the sort of barbarism of the war. And that was a true story, and this book is based on that. And the other main character there's a Bosnian member of the Olympic shooting team who is pressed into service to use her gifts as a sniper. And she sees it as her job to keep this cellist alive, because obviously he's a sitting duck, he's a sitting target. And it's a very, very good book. I don't know if Stephen Galloway's ever written anything since. Be worth checking it out, because this is a really good book. Published in 2008. So, assuming he didn't give up being a writer, which he shouldn't have, because I think this book got accolades. I don't know what's come out in the last 12 years. I'm going to look it up after I finish this video, and I might post it in the show notes. Okay, Brisbane, or to be precise, Suburban Brisbane. This is Boys Swallows Universe by Trent Dalton, and it's a really good portrayal of, I think, 80s and 90s Brisbane, which was sort of flooded by sort of drug dealing in the suburbs and lots of alcoholism, and just a really grim, gritty place. But it's sort of a low-level middle-class criminality and violence. This is not necessarily working class, you know, ghetto. This is not a ghetto. This is the suburbs of Australia, one of Australia's biggest cities. And that's what's really interesting about it. And again, you get a lot of detail of the landscape because it's important. It's told through the eyes of a boy. So obviously the landscape that he walks through and cycles through is really stamped clearly on his mind. It's a good book. It's not as mind-blowingly brilliant as Matthew Sharappa was arguing last year, but it's definitely a good read. And I think his his second novel is due to come out this year. It'd be interesting to see, because this is so personal, so subjectively based on his experiences. It'd be interesting to see what he comes up with next. And finally, book 10, American Pastoral by Philip Roth. The city in question here is Newark, New Jersey. And really, that and Detroit, I think, of all cities in America, are symptomatic of the post-industrial decline and the formation of sort of criminal, drug-infested ghettos. This is at the start of that decline and pits that changing America from the sort of wealth and boom times of the 50s and 60s, troubled as the 60s were, into the end of the 60s, which coincided with, you know, the start of industrial decline, the malaise of the psyche of America having lost the Vietnamese War, Watergate, of course, in '72. And this book is absolutely sort of at that crossroads. And there's a brilliant portrayal of, I think, of the changing face of American cities. And as a bonus, I would say that the best book about a city I've ever read, because it's really hard to write about huge cities like London and Paris and New York without, you know, you can give a slice of them, but you can't encapsulate them all. This is Jonathan Meades. This is called Pompey, and it's about the town of Portsmouth, or the city of Portsmouth in England, which is a historical naval port. It still exists as a naval port, and it was like really important, you know, throughout Britain's naval history. But it's very much a city in decline. And it's also a slightly odd city because it's basically surrounded by water, and it's almost like an island, but it isn't an island. I've never been there. My son's been there because he's been to watch a football match there. And it's a hard-nosed place, you know, it's a typical Navy town. And Meades, I don't know if Meades is from there. I suspect he's from that area. He pulls no punches. You know, this is an ugly, ugly representation of the city, but so convincing and so rich and conjures up the, you know, you can see exactly what this city's like. I just read you the back. An extraordinary work peopled by the repellent, dwelling on the vile, and yet done with so deft and brilliant a touch, a picnic in the heart of darkness, which I think is a very good summation of it. The writing is clever and complex, multi-layered and funny. What a dark pleasure it is to come across writing that is both luminous and bilious. It's very funny and it's very dark. And Jonathan Meades, in case you don't know, is a bit of a polymath. You know, he presents programmes on architecture, on design, on art. You know, he's a well-worn staple at the BBC, but occasionally he finds the time to sit down and write fiction, and this is superb. So it might be a bit surprised that Portsmouth features in my cities, but it's very much a bonus one. Okay, so there you have it. I hope you're all keeping safe and well in these dark times, and till next time, thanks very much.